Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we continue where we left off yesterday with book, book 4 of the Politics. We are looking at chapter 3 today. We noticed that it ended last time with a kind of restarting of the discussion of politics. He introduced the book, in other words, the book 3 is was the kind of we had the discussion of the regime, which ended up with a discussion of which regime was a discussion of what regime should best, which form of rule is best. Uh, we ended up with a discussion about kingship and rule of law. These two discussions in the book 3 that kind of lifted us there. And it ends. Book 3 ends as we notice this. Whether we should start with book 4 or go to book 7. We're going to be just doing traditional way, looking at this way, this way. He opens up book 4 with the kind of even admitting that, well, we talked about aristocracy already. We talked about the four good, he reasserts the typology of the regime that's beginning at 3.7, which in 3.7 is deconstructed. But then in 3.2, it's brought up again. I mean, 4.2, last chapter, was brought up again, only to be kind of set aside. And instead, a new discussion is going to be brought about the understanding the regime and how many, the nature of the regime. What is the regime again? And its varieties, and how do we understand the varieties of regimes? And he gave a 5 criteria, which did that, which we talked about in our previous video, and about chapter 2. Now we're continuing on that thing. He's gonna start the discussion about this, and again, what are the variety of regimes, right? So we're going to be in this question. Now the reason for there being a number of regimes is that there are a number of parts in any city. Polis. Again, remember the polis is an aggregation of parts. Okay, it's an aggregate unit. It's not a whole. It's not a holistic entity. It is a heterogeneous construct. Okay, and therefore it's an aggregation of aggregations of households, right? It's two, and it's an aggregation of citizens, and it's an aggregation of households. Okay, people matter like this. So therefore, we have to do a question of that. We have to understand that the reason why there's a number of regimes, he argues, is because there's a number of parts in the city. For in the first place, we see that all cities are composed of households. And next, of this aggregation, some are necessarily well off, others are poor, and others middling. And that the well off and the poor, is the armed and the unarmed element. So, wait a minute. So, we first get a first criteria. That is in fact, remember, this is interesting that the word poor, again, poor, the well off, we're starting the households, right? And of this aggregations. And some of the households are going to be what he starts off well off. That means prior. These are well off. These are the ones who have enough, well, significant, a lot more. Well, prior. Prior means resources. Prior. Then the poor as a prior, without resources. And then the other middling. The middling. Right? Rich and poor in the middling, right? It's rich, poor, middling. It's well means, without means, and middling, right? And then what does he say here? And that the well, in other words, not only with that the well off and the poor, now, in that of the well off and the poor, there is an armed and unarmed element. So one criteria, there is a rich, poor, and a middling, but then he repeats that there's an rich and poor, but doesn't repeat the middling. And then he says that there are a armed and unarmed element. We see that the people has a and we see that the people, or the people, right? And I think here the people means, I think the plethos, I think have a farming, a marketing, and working element. So of the people, now you speak, there's a people. Oh, there's people. Okay. There's not household that are well poor. Now these are people, the multitude. Maybe this is the people who make up things, right? That they're going to be what? They're going to be a farming, a marketing, and a working element, laboring element. Marketing, commercial. This is I would say, farming is the people who produce the food. This is the marketing. That means this is the people who sell it. This is on the market, right? Those engaged in the marketplace, commerce, and the last is the laboring element. Those who have, in the case of the notables too, there are different bases on wealth and the extent of property. So therefore, he speaks of not the poor and the rich. He goes from the rich and poor, but now he goes from the people, the multitude, and then to the notables, the elite. Right? We say this is elite theory. This is the elite. The notables are those who are noted. There was something that distinguished. And in the case of the notables, there's difference. So there's not only difference of the multitude, people. There's also a difference about the notables, and they differ on their based on their wealth and the extent of their property. And he goes, for example, in the matter of horse breeding, which is not easy to do for those who are not wealthy. So therefore, in other words, you have horse breeders, people like this. So therefore, there's going to be people who do who are going to deal with that. In ancient times, those cities whose power lays in horses had oligarchies, for they used horses in wars against their neighbors. For example, the Etrians and the Chaldeans and the Megastians and on the Meander, and many others in Asia. So therefore, the horses, the idea of the horse. If you relied heavily on a horse, to basically breed and to grow a horse, this requires wealth. This requires resources, and this is not this is the wealthy needs. You have to have the resources to do this, and therefore those who rely on horses are going to be oligarchic in that sense. He's saying. He goes further. In addition to differences based on wealth, there is also differences based on family, and that based on virtue. So therefore, in other words, the notables are going to differ on one is property. He gives examples of wealth and property, right? This is the variety. So one aspect is on property. The other one is going to be on family, based on the breeding, the question of their character, how old are the family, how established the family, right? And then the last one is based on virtue, character. This idea that their goodness of their character. So not only breeding and good breed, a stock of longevity, but also in the family, that this family has been long. We know it's been there, but now virtue as well. And indeed, whatever else is said to be part of the city in the discourses on aristocracy. That's this again. For there we distinguished how many necessary parts are in every city. Again, it's therefore that what he talked about the parts, and again he'll talk about the parts in that book as well. So there's two accounts of the parts here. Chapter 12 here in book 12, he says this is often referred to. This is often referred to as book 3, 12, 8, but the reference would seem also to refer to book 7, chapter 7. So therefore, in book 12, there's this discussion in book 3, chapter 12, 8, and 9. Let's go do this. Let's go look at that for a second, just to point to it so we can see what I'm doing and what we're doing, and therefore we can say what we're doing, right? 3, 12, 8, 9. So 3, 12, 8, 9, right? The dispute concerns whether those, this is 3, chapter 12. Dispute concerning necessary those respect constituted that the well-born, the free, the wealthy claim the honors There must be persons paying assessments. City cannot consist wholly that are poor. This right, and that there must be yet of these things. There also be clear that virtue and justice, the virtue, it is not possible for a city to be finely minutes without these things. Whereas the city is without the former, there can be no city. Without the latter, so without these other things, the rich, the poor, and these things, there can be no city. But you need justice and military virtue, the virtue of justice and the military virtue or political virtue, I think that's the word, then it cannot be beautifully missed, right? So that's that. We go here. Let's go back. We're not going to go to chapter 4. I'm not going to go just head of our gang. I wanted to go there just so you can see why it's traditionally referred to as that. But also it goes to book 7 in that sense. In other words, this is why it also goes to 7:7, which he talks about this parts of city also there. We'll have in the next chapter. We'll go even further into parts of the city, and that's why it's a very frustrating thing. The parts of the city is a very important aspect of this, right? For of all these parts, all take part in the regime in some case, and in others more or fewer. In others more or fewer. All these parts will take part in the regime, and that one of these parts are going to necessarily be the part that will rule, that will have more authority. That'll be the one that's authoritative, that's governing, that ruling, kokeros, in that sense, right? So therefore, all of these things are in here, the parts of the cities, and that therefore the wealthy and these people are going to be these are the categories of what parts of the city is. So not only is there the households, the city's made of households, but there's also of the rich, the poor, the poor, the middling, the armed and unarmed, and then the question of the multitude, people, the multitude, they're going to be, the type of way of life that they do. Are they farming? Are they commercial? Or are they laboring? And then the notables, right? The notables. And the notables are divided in 3 categories. One is by wealth. The other one is by like their good birth, and the last is what virtue, right? And this is how we end this. Of this thing. We hit it here. It is evident, therefore, that there must necessarily be a number of regimes differing from one another in kind, since these parts differ from another in kind. So therefore, there's one thing that's okay, I'm sorry, did I jump? Yeah. No. We talked about there's going to be parts, all these parts, and what's going to happen is all these parts take part in the regime, and therefore they're going to be, one is going to take, one of these parts are going to, one part of this is going to be more authoritative than the other part, and therefore this shapes the direction of it shapes the direction. And one way it's going to differ is evident they will be different because the number of regimes, because they will be differing in kind. That one's going to be the rule of based on wealth, the other one is not going to be based on wealth. Okay, so therefore there's going to be a clear, one's going to be unrespectable family, and the other one is going to be virtue, right? This is the idea of notable. The notables, like, or maybe the people will run, and therefore it's going to have either a farming characteristic, or a commercial characteristic, or a laboring characteristic, right? All right. So therefore, this is the way that these regimes are different in a sense. So therefore, they'll differ in terms of kind, but since these parts differ from one another in kind, right? Some of these parts will differ with well, if it's going to be the people are going to be dominant, that's going to be one type of thing. If it's going to be the notables that are dominant, it's going to be another one. Okay, see what the thing about here goes here. And in fact, this is very interesting. At one level, we do have Aristotle seems to kind of even agree with Machiavelli that there's going to be 2 dominant trajectories here in reality in regimes. That of the notables and of the people. We'll see this little. We'll keep on seeing this. Ready? So therefore, now a regime is an arrangement of one. This is where it repeats the idea. The regime is an arrangement of offices, and all distribute these either on the basis of power of those who are taking part in the regime or on the basis of some equality common to them. I mean, the poor, the authority or power of the poor, or the well-off, or equally common to both. Now, uh, he has a note here. This clause, sometimes bracketed as implication, usually understood to mean some equally common to all, but badly off or well off, and some equally common to both. It has been explained as the power of the badly off and the well off, or the power of the common to both. So I think this clause. This is why this is the argument is that there's sometimes bracket as something that's added to it. This weird passage, but I think this is not a weird passage. I think this is a very important passage here. Because this line here is a regime is an aggrandizement of office, right? Arrangement of offices, arrangement of the part of the functions of the city, right? And distribution of these offices are the base of power of those who take part in the regime, or on the basis of some equality common to them. In other words, and by mean of this, of that is who's going to be the ruling? Is going to be the poor or the well-off, or something, or do they share it, a common to both of these groups? What is the basis of that going to be the ruling element, right? There are necessary, therefore, many regimes, as there are agreements based on the sort of preeminence of and the difference of parts. So, therefore, to understand the nature of how many regimes there are, the number of regimes is not determined by one, few, many, but rather what there are. In other words, there are necessary, therefore, as many regimes as there are arrangements of these parts, based on a sort of preeminence, in which one's ruling, which part is going to preeminate, to dominate, or to kind of to dominate or to shape the thing, the differences of the parts. In other words, they shape how the difference, the different. In other words, that um, let's look at that line again: preeminence and the differences of the parts. So therefore, the number of regimes equals the number of parts there are in the city. That are in this that constitutes the city. But in other words, he said, but then again, right here, next line, this is where he's the most Machiavellian, right? But there are held to be two sorts of regimes, particularly. In other words, so really, even though there are a great variety of regimes based on the number, but there's going to be two sorts of regimes, particularly, generally. And he says, just as the case of the winds, some are called northern, others called southern, and the other deviations from these. So, in other words, the other ones are just deviations from the northern winds and the southern winds. And he says, he uses the example of the winds. There's northern winds and southern winds, but the other winds are kind of deviations from the one or the other, right? So many hold. There are two sorts of regimes. So, so, in other words, so this is why, because in other words, here, this is why I think this is level opinion, he says in the Greek, that many hold there are two sorts of regimes: the rule of the people and oligarchy, right? There's going to be fundamentally two. At this level, there's going to be principally two different things. That of either they're going to be the rule of the multitude, or the people, or the rule of the oligarchy, or the few, right? The rule of the many, few, or the many, right? This is the classic position. They regard aristocracy as a kind of oligarchy, on the grounds that it is a sort of rule by the few, and so-called regime as a kind of democracy, just as among the winds, the western is regarded as belonging to the northern and the eastern to the southern, right? Okay, in other words, and then he says that, so he uses the argument of the winds. In other words, that even though the differentiation in other words, in reality, people speak of a regime called regime, but it's not really its democracy. It's the same as democracy. It's the rule of the people. Whereas the aristocracy is just a form of oligarchy, rule of the few. Although means few in that sense. In that sense, it does matter. It's few and many, right? Um, it is also similar in the case of harmonies. So does they assert. So some assert, right? This is again. He gives some people assert this again. Some people. This is how he presents it as opinion. Therefore, these metaphors that he's doing here to kind of do this. So we have the democracy and oligarchy, the northern wind, southern wind, the Dorian and Pythagorean melodies, right? So, in other words, uh, 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 it is similar also with harmonies. Some they assert that they begin two kinds of these as well: Dorian and Pythagorean. Pythagorean, I'm sorry. While the others modal arrangement they call either Doric or Pythagorean. Now, again, 14, this is a note here. This view seems to underlie Plato's treatment of the mode Harmonides in the Republic, right? Which is generally taken reflecting the musical doctrines of the school of Demon, right? So he just kind of repeats this the teaching of the Republic about musics, right? And therefore, there's two kind of modes, okay, harmonies. Men are accustomed, particularly then, to conceive regimes of this way. So therefore, this is how people will understand it. In other words, this is he's presenting here at one level how we're going to understand that how men are accustomed to understanding. They conceive regimes in this way, but it is true and better to distinguish as we have. That is to say, that one or two are finely constituted, and the other is a deviation from them, deviation from well blended harmonies, as well as from the best regime. The more taught the harmony being oligarchic, and more like the rule of a master, and the relaxed, the soft one being popular, right? Again, this is 15. The interpretation of this passage has been much disputed. I retain harmonia at A626 instead of bracketing the word with Ishmael from the well blending regimes as well as the best regime, right? And I understand the final clause to referring to harmonies instead of regimes, as generally assumed to do, and take the word despotica as closer to the rule of master, to prelate rather than to the predicate rather than the subject. The well blended harmonies would seem to be the mixed Lydian, which which forms a mean between the extremes of the taut Lydian, the Syndodactyl and the Phrygian on the one hand, and the relaxed Lydian and the Ionian harmonies on the other. And the second of the two, or one or two, well constituted harmonies would seem to be Dorian. The implicit comparison then would appear to be between mixed Lydian and he says a polity, a mixture of oligarchy and democracy. Book 4, chapter 8, he argues. I think this is I disagree in this a little bit. And the one or two constitute regimes which would seem at least to be parallel, to be exact, of a regime and aristocracy. Again, he says it's polity, but I think this. My stomach is really going. I think he's misreading this at a certain level because I would argue. I don't think we should read this discussion of polity as really polity. I think we should stay with the idea that this is talking about regime. In other words, because it is the politeia, the called politeia, right? The Greek is not. It's not. He wants us. It sounds like he's talking about a. I think the idea that we appears to be talking about a specific thing, but rather he's really in fact talking about the whole, the regime as a whole. Okay. In other words, at one level, it appears to be account of a specific regime type, The politeia are called politeia. But in fact, when you just look at what's being discussed, when we get to those later chapters, it is referring to all regimes, not just to. So therefore, what is supposed to be an account about a specific, special, unique variety ends up being really, in fact, an account of the whole. Okay? And I think this is the thing about this. And I think there is this, at one level, there is only there's this tendency. In other words, at one level, there is only these two regimes, that are the many and the few in the political realm. And that the regimes are going to be, these two forces are going to be driving any regime. The many and the few, the people, the multitude, and the notables. Okay, which and what's going to happen is this tendency is that we see. Therefore, we see this double tendency, that there's this twofold. The metaphor of the winds, the metaphor of the harmonies, are going to have a blend. Now, there's a good argument here. I think Lord is not wrong in arguing that there is an that the metaphor here points to the idea that a blending is necessary. But all regimes are really blended, because remember, it's an aggregate. The city is an aggregation, so it's an aggregation of different parts, and therefore every city is blending of parts. Therefore, and the regime is a certain one that is going to be what? Authoritative. A certain group part is going to take control, have authority, exercise authority, or lead or dominate, or exercise either through, sometimes with the consent of the people, or consent of everyone agrees to it, or they just do it themselves and everyone just caves into it. Either Aristotle will point out how that works. I think this is a very interesting chapter in that sense. It gives us it talks about this variety. We get this discussion of what is the multitude character of what is before. We get in chapter 1, we get a discussion of the different types of best. In chapter 2, we get a kind of restatement of the concern for the regime and how we're going to look at it. We get a projection of what he's going to do. And here we start off with the question of what is the regime, right? Chapter 3 is, we get the idea of the regime as the aspect of parts, and we get the different parts. And then we get this discussion of really there's only two. The real thing is going to be this tension between the people and that. That's why, and this is why people will say there's going to be primarily only two regimes. Okay, and that the idea that this seems to agree with the concepts of the winds and the idea that two types of winds and two types of harmonies, and that therefore this argument here is that the blending of the harmony he mentions here is also about the necessary that every city that's going to be well done, a regime that's going to be well done, is going to have to blend the parts well. You have to blend it well, that produces what? A proper harmony rather than discord. Okay, some harmony is going to work better with some orders. In other words, the population, certain populations will require the certain parts of the thing are going to be ordered differently, because the matter, who's constituted there, what people, what are they, who are they, what are the people, what is it, what kind of life they lead, what is their character, what are their disposition like, are they do they have enough, are they rich, poor, or have enough, are they too wealthy, or they who are the notables? What defines them? All these things are going to really fundamentally shape how we understand how how you would balance it to work it well. Okay, and that's, I think this is the interesting aspect of chapter 3. I think we're going to stop here. You have any questions? Please put them below, and I will answer them. I can see they're going to say, "Oh God, this is confusing. Why did you?" It is very. This is a very interesting text. This is why I like it, because in many ways it forces us, if you look carefully at the text and follow the text. And so this is why sometimes even you have to turn to the Greek, and you can't rely on the translations, because even a good translation is going to mislead you because every translation is kind of an interpretation. This is why we need to learn the languages to understand a mind like Aristotle. We actually may have to, read the Greek in order to see what he's really trying to say, because every interpretation is kind of every kind of translation is kind of a pushing an interpretation. I like Lord, but even Lord pushes an interpretation, like is he done here with the choice of translating politeia, the Greek word politeia, as this. And as we shows in the notes, he's constantly choosing one way to read this over another as a mechanism to explain why it fits with his understanding. Okay. So this is why confronting this text is a very important one, because it gets us thinking about not only about just about the Greek, and who cares about the Greek? Why can't you just talk about to understand the brilliance of Aristotle here is that he's giving us a very complex model, but one that allows us to understand something that's dynamic. Whereas a lot of models are reductionistic. This model isn't. This model, the Hobbesian model, where we get this constructions of units. In other words, we get a holistic model that everything gets in there, and the Marxist model with the conflict of class warfare. But we don't understand how classes emerge and what differentiates them. We get this historic argument that is problematic and not always correct. With Aristotle, we get kind of an understanding. We look through the different arguments of different people, and now we're getting to the discussion of how do we understand the these institutions. We look at the politeia as the regime as the structure that gives like I said, the polis is that the koinonia common to us. We live in human beings live in. This is functions of households, aggregation of households. The households are three, as we said, there are three relations: as husband, wife, parent, child, master, slave. Aggregates of aggregates. Okay, the nature of the city is that of this idea of citizens, right? That the citizen is one who shares in rule. That political rule differs from oligarchy. Oh no, sorry. Political rule differs from mastery or despotic, which is mastery by coercion, force. Political rule is over free people, right? Mastery is over slaves or unfree people. The nature of this, therefore, the regime is a city is of free people, right? A association or koinonia of free people who share a life together. And therefore, the interconnection of what Aristotle Book 3 talked about is the regime is the form, the shape by which the ordering and institutions that give birth to the nature of that shapes and directs the city, the polis. And that the politeuma, the ruling part, the part that rules, the governing part, the politeuma in the city regime, politeia, are kind of interconnected, and therefore the politeuma shapes the regime. What part is ruling? The part that is the most ruling, the ones who is governing and that has authority in the city, in the regime, and therefore the regime shapes the city, and that's the nature of how this works. Again, I'm sorry, you can put your questions and comments there. If you liked it, like it, share it. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, say the problem is, please, if you've not subscribed, please subscribe. Get others to, if you know someone who would like to be interested in this, get them the courage to subscribe. That's why I share this on social media. Sharing something like this on social media to your friends or to passing it on will help get awareness of the channel. I understand this is like this. Okay, whatever. Now you can follow me on social media below. What else? The money, because I'm going to now show a little bit. The nature YouTube is changing. It's how it's funding these things in the sense that they're charging us a certain size. We got where I'm over my limit, and you have to start paying for my size, my videos out there. I'm not big enough that I get money from YouTube. I wish not that I want money from YouTube. I would probably use the money to YouTube to pay YouTube back, right? But no. I'm doing this for you guys. I'm not. You can help by Patreon or Subscribe Star. But people say, "Well, you don't do anything for us. You're not having exclusives." No, because I'm just doing this to kind of like to do this. And I'm sorry I have to keep on saying this to people because it's repetitive and boring. But every time you have to do this at this point, this is what you have to do. If you want to help and you don't want to do those things, you can also just buy the book. This is my commentary on ourselves politics. Not commentary; it's not the wrong word. My commentary. I have two books that are commentaries. I'm working on another one. This is not a commentary. This is the notebook. This is a study guide. This is a kind of a book that you work. It's really kind of a tool and asset when you're reading the politics to work with this. So that it's not a summary. It's not summarizing it. It's kind of helping you to understand and follow and work through the text. It's like a Cliff's Notes, right? But not a kind of mere summarization of things. If you know someone who wants to study it, this would be a useful thing to study with it. It has charts and places that you can put your notes in it. With that, you can buy it through Amazon, Google. You buy it through Lulu. I make more money from it because they will send, they in other words, instead of Amazon and the other places getting the money, Lulu gives me the money. But voila, that's how it is. You probably would pick Amazon or a place like that because of free shipping. Whatever you want to help to buy the book, buy it for a friend. That's it. Um, okay, we're at. I did my advertisement. Please now have a good day. We'll continue in chapter 4 next time. Continue this, which begins our discussion of democracy, but it's kind of weird. We start with democracy, then we talk about the parts again. Okay, but we'll start seeing that next time. Okay, take care. Bye bye.